Don't Fear Tech Tools. We have, starting on this end, we've got Rob Weir, who's the Columbia, Missourian Digital Development Director. He's going to talk a little bit about programming and coding. Next, we've got Mike McKean, Futures Lab Director, who will talk about mobile app development. And on the end over there, we've got David Herzog, Academic Advisor for the National Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting. He's going to talk a bit about data journalism. I'm going to go ahead and pass around the sign-up sheet so we can add you to our email list so you can know about all our upcoming events, whether it be this semester or next. And then our lovely panels will get started. So whichever of you, Mike. Cool. Mike's wearing Argyle just like the rest of the ONA execs. So
who else remembers?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to talk actually not so much about app development, though we do that, and we have a course in it in conjunction with the computer science department, but to talk a little bit more about the different ways in which we're using mobile technology in journalism, both to produce content, to distribute it, to promote it, to get people to consume and share it. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of some of the things that are going on in that space, and then we can obviously have some Q&A after that. When it comes to mobile, really this is kind of the big question right now that media companies are asking themselves. Does touch really make a difference? Is it the answer to our prayers? Is it the way that we're going to salvage journalism by using mobile technology and touch technology? How many of you have seen this video? Anybody? A few people? We'll watch it anyway. So you get it, the baby automatically understands the iPad and understands touch and interacting with their world through that device. She tries to do the same thing with printed publications. It won't pinch, it won't zoom, it won't tap, it won't play, right? So that's a fun video, and in it, I suppose, is a nice promotion for tablets, but it gives you the idea that supposedly, touch really is something that's ingrained in us genetically. Being able to interact with content in that intimate way is supposed to be an improvement, okay? But there is some data to actually back up the fact that tablets may be a new qualitative kind of experience for journalists, right? So for example, and this is sort of the equation we're working from, the hope, the theory, whatever you want to call it, right? The touch is more engaging. Being more engaged means you're more loyal, meaning you're more loyal, we can make more money off it. That's the hope, right? But there was actually an interesting study done by the BBC, actually they did it, I believe, in August, and they released the results last month. But what they did is they interviewed people about their tablet experience, people who had tablet devices. And here's what they found. Good news, right? People who use tablets are more likely to view national and local news than they did before. They're more likely to rely on us, the traditional producers of news content, than, say, aggregators or other sources. And people say that tablet news is more interesting and more enjoyable. If that's true, great. And another study that was put out by ComScore last month as well suggests that, in fact, doesn't suggest, it says that for those major newspapers you see on the screen there, the New York Times, USA Today, etc., that when you look at their web audience on computers and on notebook computers, and then you look at the mobile audience instead, mobile is adding anywhere from 7 to 11% unique new audience to those newspapers' websites. So that says something, I hope, too, about the need to move into those mobile platforms, right? Still, we have trouble. You know about all these problems, right? We have all these different kinds of mobile phones we have to design content for. Right? Whether they're touch screen, big screen, small screen, keyboards, no keyboard, whatever, right? And we have these problems to deal with too, right? Too many dang operating systems to easily design a usable experience that's consistent across all those platforms. But there are people who are trying to figure it out. So the argument is, do we build apps for the platforms that are most popular? Do we use HTML5 and other web technologies to try to say, well, whatever your device is, we can give you a consistent experience, or do we look for some sort of hybrid between the two that might give us the best of both worlds? The people who focus on apps are saying, well, this allows you to take advantage of the native functions of the device, like the camera and the accelerometer and the compass and geolocation and all those things that you can't easily do just through a web interface. But people who promote HTML5 say you can quickly design an experience across all platforms for any device that has a browser. There's some utility to that, okay? And then there are some people that say, well, why don't we try to do both? In the class that we are teaching, and I hope some of you will consider signing up for it in your time here, where we're doing app development, we switched over this semester from doing straight iOS native application development to using a technology called PhoneGap, where we could use a foundation of HTML5, JavaScript, CSS, and then import what we built into the SDKs, the programs you use to generate the native apps, spit out an iOS app, spit out an Android app. It's supposed to be a faster, cleaner process. I'll let you know if that turns out to be true. We're near the end of the semester and it looks like it may or may not work out that way, all right? Show you a quick couple of demos here, if I can, of what I think are some really innovative uses of mobile apps and why you might want to consider the possibility of learning how to do this. Assuming it will switch over to my iPad here in just a second. You know you want to. No. It worked earlier. Well, let's try it again. You didn't want to see anything on the iPad anyway, did you? Oh, here we go, good. All right. I would show you Newsy.com's app because frankly it's one of the most innovative apps that's out there on any mobile platform, but probably a lot of you have seen it already. Some of you may have even worked on it. In fact, I know a couple of guys in the back who have. But it doesn't want to. Well, in the interest, let's see if it will stay there long enough to make a difference. So I'm going to show you NPR's app, and one of the things about it, from design to functionality, it really caters to the audience for NPR content. So you've got their news, their lifestyle content, their music content, all in individual rivers so that you can quickly select visually from the content you want to look at. Okay. If there's a story that has audio content in it, I can just listen to that. I hope.
The hard times many Americans are facing. As part of the series, NPR.
If I don't have time to listen to it now, I can hit the playlist button and create my own custom newscast, if you will. Right? I can listen to that anytime I like. I can share Twitter, Facebook, email. That's pretty common for most apps today on tablets. I can listen to hourly updates.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. Protection for the people.
I can access content that's pre-recorded, that's my favorite content from NPR. If I want to listen to it live, if I want to listen to it recorded, if I want to set it up as a podcast, I can do all those things. And I can use the geolocation feature of the app to find my nearest NPR radio stations. And I can choose from one of those and listen to the live stream
web
back.
broadcast is made possible by financial support from listeners like you.
So you get the idea of how that works, right? Now let me show you, and that shows some of the benefits of having a native app. You can take advantage of geolocation and other features that you can't easily do with HTML5. Now let's look at an HTML5 app. Actually, this is a prototype. It isn't a full-blown magazine app, but it's something called Aside. See if it likes to load here. It was developed by some folks in Germany. It gives you a magazine-like feel. It gives you a table of contents, much like you'd see on some of the magazine apps that are out there now that are more popular. You can embed any kind of multimedia content. Like we want to listen to some German polka. Let's see if we can. So anyway, you can take advantage of HTML5 only, no native app, and you can build an experience, theoretically, that is similar to the immersive experience of a native tablet app. I'll show you real quickly a couple of things that I find pretty interesting with regard to what I think is probably the most innovative magazine app anyway, and that's Wired. How many of you have seen the Wired app before? Anybody? Okay, well, let's open it up. Here's a story that uses all of the multimedia skills that you could imagine to draw people into the app. It's a story about folks in India, the government trying to use mobile fingerprint scanners to try to build a database of citizens in that country. And I already did it just to make sure it would work, but you put your fingers on the screen and it pretends to scan them. It's really just an animation, but it's a way that gets you into the story. So you've got visuals, it's a very long form text piece, you've got embedded video. So it's a great way to integrate multimedia to tell a longer form story in ways that we perhaps haven't been able to do very effectively online in the past. Show you another thing with regard to advertising that's both really interesting and ethically challenging as well. One of the things that Wired does is a lot of product evaluations, right? So they will do reviews of all kinds of gadgets. Oh, for example, technology for streaming audio to different devices. So there's editorial content here, and then they make it easy for you to touch the items you want to read reviews about. But you know, I don't know how well you can see it from this projector, but in the upper right-hand corner of the text box it says Buy Now. They've done a deal with Amazon and MasterCard, so you can do essentially one-touch purchases of the items you've read about in the editorial content. And Wired gets a percentage, I don't know how much, but they get a percentage of each sale. Does that affect which products you evaluate and how you evaluate them, knowing that you might get some revenue from what you say about them? I don't know, interesting. But it's a way to generate a new revenue stream through mobile that we haven't done before. So that'll give you some ideas about how that works. Now let's take a look at something that's more of a hybrid. Come on, projector. I'm going to show you something called the Half Moon Bay Review, a community in Northern California. And there is a company that's working with this local newspaper to produce a tablet-like experience on a foundation of HTML5, but then porting it over to be able to produce native apps as well. Oh, come on. Let's try it again. So I'm going to show it to you live rather than just the screenshot. So this is what the Half Moon Bay Reviews website looks like. You can display it on the computer, which I'm doing. You can display it on a tablet. It has an HTML5 underpinning. I can go to the news content, for example, and it's just pulling a feed from Half Moon Bay Review, trying to anyway. All right. But it also gives me the opportunity to do things that I can only do with a native app, or at least I can do easily with a native app, like I'm using geolocation to build a map of content around this newspaper. I can choose to use geolocation to find where I truly am, not where they want me to be. But I can also use this map to interactively put content on there like deals of the day, news events. You can customize it for whatever kind of content you want to search for in their area. And this is using PhoneGap to develop this kind of hybrid system. I know I'm running over a little bit because of our issues with the projector, so I'm going to say just very briefly a couple of other things about mobile reporting. Some of you may know, and some of you may have already engaged in using mobile phones to do some reporting assignments. We started doing this in Convergence a couple of years ago when Erica and Brian were invited to go to the Olympics in Vancouver and use iPhones and some technology developed by one of the partners to do feature stories there. They came back with the technology and decided to try it out on a more normal type of local story, in this instance KBIA's coverage of the elections. And what they got, this is Erica shot it with her iPhone, Brian went out and recorded stories with his. He's interviewing sources for election night, he's voicing his own narration into the piece for KBIA. He's sitting in the car and editing this with software in real time, so he can do multi-track editing of his piece. And when he's finished putting the story together, you're going to see him use the 3G network to upload his story directly into the KBIA servers so they can pull it up into their computers in the studio and do their own election night broadcasts, including Brian's content. And when he gets done doing that, he's going to use the software on the phone to also create a slideshow. So you're going to see him in a moment taking some pictures. He's going to marry those pictures with an audio track, and then he's going to upload those pictures back to KBIA's website so they can include them on election night as well. So those are some of the, there's lots of software tools out there. These are tools developed by one of the companies that we're partnering with called Weir. We went from there to create a mobile reporting guide with the help of Will Sullivan, who was one of our fellows last year. And if you take a look at that guide, what you'll see is that we did product reviews over some of the more interesting software and hardware pieces that go along with the iPhone and to a lesser extent Android phones as a way to cover news remotely. So, for example, if you wanted to see a side-by-side comparison of prices and features of different tripods that you use with your phone, you could do that. A quick review of each of them. Did you know that there's actually a tripod mount that you can screw onto a soda bottle? I mean, if that's the only thing you've got, you can use that in the field to get a steady shot with your iPhone for stills or video. So that is out there and it's still available actually if you want to take a look at it on our RJI website. Just search for mobile tools and you can find the page there. I was going to show you, but rather than risk swapping things out, just trust me, there are all kinds of apps. There's a nice one called Photoshop Express, which is just what you'd expect it to be. It works on your phone or your tablet. You can edit pictures and you can submit them to your newsroom CMS in a hurry. There are other tools like Writer that let you format all kinds of different written word, including scripts for packages, broadcast packages you might want to create. There's video tools. There's all kinds of stuff out there. You played around much with QR codes. You've seen them, of course, now. They're everywhere. Not that many people actually use them yet. 6, 7, 8% of the public uses them. But they're beginning to grow. For example, you've got magazines that are using them for promotional campaigns. You've got QVC that's using them to sell to directly on television to people. And I thought I'd just show you this very quickly because it was produced by 2 students, actually, 2 people who graduated last May. Matthew Schmertz and Amanda Bromwich, who took part in various competitions, our iOS class, and a lot of other things. They're now working for an agency called the Marketing Arm in Dallas, and they helped produce this spot for JCPenney to try to involve social media and QR codes for the Christmas holiday season.
Who's your Santa? JCPenney would like to wish you a Merry Christmas.
Hey John, it's Jen. Merry Christmas. Hey John, it's Jen. Merry Christmas.
I have no idea how successful that campaign is going to be, but it's going a long way from just using QR codes to take me to a static web page or even pull up a video clip and play it back. It's really trying to find where the social is in this advertising and promotional world that's out there with mobile devices. There's other things you could see and just ask me about them later. Augmented reality is a new technology, relatively new technology that we think is going to be very interesting for everything from finding yourself in a city. This is an app for the Paris metro system, to actually marrying up movie clips shot on location. If you happen to be in a city where a movie was shot, here's a company that's built an app that will overlay reality with movie scenes that were shot on location. Lots of different things you can do there. And then just to wrap it up for me, this is about a minute long. This is a vision of the future of newspapers, but it's also a vision of what we call the web of things. Everything in your household or your workplace seamlessly and wirelessly integrated so that you can take your personal media, your social media, and your public media, news, information, whatever, and transfer them from one place to another without too much work. He's grabbing information from his television, quote unquote, which also can display any other kinds of visuals, grabs it remotely, throws it on his newspaper, which is really sort of a smart fabric that's being developed now that can conduct internet information. And so the point is, we're rapidly entering an environment where the distinctions between personal, social, and public are blurring, and we need to be in that space. And the way we get into that space is through new careers. These are some of the job titles that some of our students are now taking that didn't exist 5 years ago, right? So these are opportunities you have to take on new careers, to build a new mobile environment that may save journalism, quote unquote. And with that, Rob, let me switch places with you here.
Many Apple devices can we get on one?
Really?
Okay. When Ashley asked me to come talk, what she mentioned that sort of the topic of this was about was the idea that we don't want to fear technology tools. And what I do for the J School is I work over at the Missourian, and I'm in charge of our IT department and all of our development for the Missourian and for Box, our mobile stuff that we're doing to our websites, so on and so forth. That's all something that I do. And I also teach J4502 and 7502, which are our two. It's the obviously undergrad and grad component of the class where we teach fundamentals of coding. And as far as I know, that's the only course in the J School that actually really teaches HTML and CSS. And I think it's an important skill to have. And in terms of not fearing technology tools, my plea to you tonight is to go through some reasons to please stop using Design View and Dreamweaver and get into actually writing native code, which is a lot more fun. And will guarantee you a lot more earnings. That's totally not guaranteed, but ideally. So in our 12-step program, the first thing we have to do is to admit that we have a problem. So you probably got asked to use Dreamweaver by a well-meaning Mizzou professor who wanted you to build a portfolio site. You maybe used it to create a personal site, so you opened up Design View and you started dropping in images and moving stuff around and, kind of going crazy with everything, right? So you created this awesome site that worked in the browser you were looking at it in, or it worked in the Dreamweaver essentially Design View. And then you probably went home for Thanksgiving and you were at your grandma's house and she has an old PC with Turbo button on it still and whatnot, and you looked at it in another browser. Anybody have this experience? Totally does not work in IE, or does not work in Chrome, or does not work in anything else. And then you go into the code, and if you don't know how the code works, if you don't know how the fundamentals of the website work, you're not going to be able to fix anything in the code. moving stuff around in your design view is not going to make things better in other browsers. It's not going to prepare you to get those cool jobs that Mike was talking about just now. Reassuring code really isn't that hard to learn. There's something like 100 HTML tags, probably 20 of which get used on a regular basis. There's an increasing number of CSS selectors, probably 15 or so of which get used on a regular basis. And there's a little bit of JavaScript, but more and more CSS3 is taking over some of the presentational effects that the DOM used to be able to do, that JavaScript used to be able to do. And more about that in a minute. Related to Dreamweaver problem, Dreamweaver makes it really easy to write really awful code. Because you just get into the design view and you start dropping things and moving them around and whatever else, and you end up with a lot of spaghetti and a lot of unused code that you don't need. So that slows down browsers, it's hard for other humans to actually read and edit and deal with, and it won't be accessible to screen readers or other devices that help people with assistive technology, which is a big deal, especially if you work in the government like we do. Anything that we produce for our sites has to be something that can be used by a wide variety of people with different disabilities. I promise you, no matter how bad your HTML is that you write by hand, it will be cleaner than the machine-generated stuff from what you're doing in Dreamweaver. And the basic issue that we run into with this, and why I want to sort of make this plea for you to learn native code, is that design view in Dreamweaver is fundamentally misleading. No matter what Adobe wants you to think, designing a web page is not designing a print page. It's not the same. It's not the same application. The way that you interact with it is completely different. The different items that you can use with it are completely different. So that's the problem. The related problem here is that a new version comes out every couple of years, and you have to relearn the new version every time and pay for the new version of this every single time. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript aren't going anywhere. The original HTML stuff that was written in the HTML version that Tim Berners-Lee developed, which would be HTML 1.0 if it had a version number, still works on the internet. The HTML5 spec isn't even scheduled to be finalized until 2022, which is actually kind of aggressive. So the code that you write will work, and it will continue to work in the future if you know those native tools. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to change for you. So you decided to put Dreamweaver. Let's get yourself some better tools. You need 3 things to code a website. You need a browser, so you can look at what the website is, and you need a text editor, so you can write some text. And then optionally, if you want to actually upload this somewhere where people can see it, you need an FTP client. And courage to be able to code a website. So browser recommendation, Chrome, cost $0. Text editor recommendation, Text Wrangler, cost of $0. And an FTP client recommendation, CyberDuck or Fetch, it's got a clear interface, and it costs $0. There's kind of an advantage here when you look at how you want to be able to learn this code and be able to do these things. The next thing to do is to make a website. Actually sit down and write some HTML and make a website. And I don't care if it's a picture of a cat, make a website. This is all the code that you need to make a website that will live on the internet and make you forever famous. So you've got some HTML, you've got a header tag, you've got a body tag, a headline, and an image. And this is nicely accessible because it has alt text. You don't even have to do that. And that's your first website. Okay, quite literally, this is what we do in 4502. We actually make students use pictures of themselves, but that's the first website that we build and we code in 4502. And then once you have that website done, you can work on presentation. And again, I think that the problem that we run into with using presentational tools like Dreamweaver and stuff to build websites is that it encourages people to just start moving stuff around on a page and not really paying attention to what it is that they want to be getting at. The temptation is just to design and make it look pretty and decide what you want to do. So you sketch first and code second. That's another piece of advice that I would give, is always have a plan for what's going to be going on with your website, because you can very quickly change things around. And I drew my first website and I realized, wow, I've got 5 columns on the top, 2 in the middle, 3 on the bottom. That doesn't make any sense. So then I can go down here and I can actually draw something that has some widths on it, has a better column thing going on, I've got a little gutter here. But I can do that really quickly without investing a whole lot of time with it, and then when I decide what I want to do, then I can actually go through and start working on presentation. So there are 3 things that I wrote here to make our cat page super fancy, and this is a much better cat page than the first cat page, as you can tell. I mean, it's got like a drop shadow on the border and all this stuff here. So remember, this was our original source code, that all you have to write in a text editor to be able to do this. And then here's what we wrote to make that happen. So we defined a font, a size, and a style. Put a shadow on the image and a border around the image, and put a background color on the page. That's it. That's like all you had to do that. And you have an infinitely better picture of a cat than you did just minutes ago. This is the way that you learn how to do this stuff, is you just keep doing that on a small scale and you keep iterating it and you keep trying things out and seeing what's going to work for you and what's not going to work. The next step is figuring out how other sites work. So you've got your awesome cat page, but you want it to be super special, and there's plenty of awesome sites out there that you can model things after. We'll take a look at a couple of those just real quick. These are sites, Lost World Fairs. It's purely, it doesn't have any use, it's purely an example site. But this is also pure HTML and CSS. There is no Flash involved here. There's no other animations involved here. These are just sites that people associated with Jason Santa Maria made to essentially demonstrate to you the cool stuff you can do as you scroll down this page. And the type presentation that you can get. Again, it's pure HTML and CSS. There's nothing else that's going on here. It's presentational. It will work on an iPad or any other device. And we have a plesiosaur, and we get down here, we have a squid, and we finally arrive at Atlantis. Now, you can go through and figure out what's going to happen, how this is going to work, using a variety of really easy tools that you can use in your own browser. You can even go forth and steal the code that would make these things happen. Any browser that you have, Chrome has this built in, a web inspector that will tell you exactly what's going on here in this particular site. So I've selected this image for the logo, and it's telling me, for example, exactly how we get to the styles and the stuff that's going on here. And you can look at that and figure out how websites go on. The students in my class who come to me for help usually see me doing this because I'm trying to figure out, what's going on in their code, and that's the really easy way to do that. I mean, actually, don't steal code, but the selectors are the same things, and the tags themselves are going to be the same across any number of websites. So don't actually steal code, but definitely go in and look at other websites and figure out how they're doing things, and then start applying that to your site. So then try out a little bit of presentation on your site. You found a scrapbook page that looks really cool, so we did a text rotation, transform on this essentially to make the cat a little bit, look like it's a scrapbooky looking page. This is another, I guess it's 3 lines of code because you have to account for different browsers, but that's all you have to do in the browser to be able to do this sort of thing. The road to people getting really frustrated with HTML starts with people biting off more than they can chew, at least initially. So start small, try a few bits of presentation out on your site, sketch it first, and then go through and figure out how you can code this. Once you've done that, you're going to have to embrace pre-made tools at some point. There's a lot of places out there that will offer you cool tools that you can use on the web and use their code in their code examples. We did this in 4502. This is a fun jQuery plugin that you download and you can embed with your site with some jQuery and be able to do some stuff with. But to make the best use out of those free tools, you absolutely have to know the CSS and HTML and JavaScript that works behind them. And part of that process of learning that is just going through and figuring out essentially how it's breaking stuff and then figuring out what you did to make it broken and then unbreaking it. That's the process that works for everybody. If the image slider plugin is not cool enough for you, here is a plugin that will make a raptor on your screen. Sorry, there's a sound effect as well. How much cooler is your site if you have a raptor on it? And you can do this with jQuery and with some simple HTML than if you have a site that doesn't have a raptor on it. I mean, you can do this you can take a transparent image of anything that you wanted to, and you probably still want to use that sound because it's awesome. But this is a simple plugin that you can download, but you have to have some knowledge of HTML and CSS behind this to actually make this thing work. The reassuring thought is that the best way to do this is just play around with the code, break some stuff, and nothing about this is magic. It just takes some time on your end to be able to learn how it goes. So if you're getting into sophisticated code, at some point you might want to invest in a somewhat more expensive HTML or CSS editor that is not, and Dreamweaver has these aspects to it. If you've already got Dreamweaver, that's awesome. This is just part of a plea to not just use Design View to be able to do these things. So a lot of editors that are out there will let you do auto-filter tags. They'll color code your elements, which will make more sense in a minute. I'll show you how that works. It'll give you an instant web preview. The one that I use does that. That's very cool. It'll give you helper tools for some of the presentational stuff in CSS, which is nice. And basically what it does is once you figure this out, is it lets you code a lot more quickly than you would have otherwise. So this is a screenshot of what the editor that I use does. And this is what I mean by it'll autofill. If I type in body and I start putting in a selector, it will give me these options for do you want a background, attachment color, image position, XY position, repeat. It will tell me where I'm at in the document up here in the navigator. It will give me options for decoration in here. And this is what I mean by it will color code your code. Essentially what that means is that if I'm sitting here in my editor and I write something, I start writing a selector, like background attachment, and I forget to put something in here, I have to have a colon in there for that to be valid CSS. I'm going to be able to tell immediately that something's wrong because it's not the same level as my other CSS and everything else that's going on in here. So if you're getting serious about this, invest in a decent HTML and CSS editor. It'll make your life so much better. And then invest in training. There's a couple of sites, lynda.com and treehouse.com are great sites for training. They're both subscription-based. The Treehouse, which was ThinkVitamin until recently, also has free videos, and they've made the training experience in Treehouse highly social, so you can actually go through and get like badges for doing, let's see, it's up in here. You can go through and get badges and share things socially with your friends for doing web development, and they made it into a game essentially like Foursquare or something like that. You can unlock the HTML badge. For example, for them. 4502, 7502 teaches HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and that's the only course that I know of that does that at the J School as part of the regular course. Moving further abroad, if you want to take programming classes, the College of Engineering has a minor in CS, although you may have already settled on a minor. But if I were coming out of J School right now, I would love to have at least taken some programming classes or having minored in this. Even 10 years ago when I graduated, well, 12 years ago, 14 years ago when I graduated, it would have been smart to have done that even at the time. There's free training available from Do It, which nobody freaking takes advantage of. And it's training that's done by computer science types, so realize that it's not journalism-related training, but essentially you sign up for a Do It class. If you attend, you don't pay anything. If you don't attend, then you have to pay like $80. So just go to the class and sit through it, and it's super useful. They also have open lab sessions, even if you aren't in the class, if you haven't done anything, every Friday in Memorial Union, unless there's a few Fridays a year that they don't. So they're not going to do your homework for you, but if you have a question about something specific on a site, you can go and they'll help you with specific questions. And I cannot recommend this site highly enough. It's a couple of my favorite web designers have created dumpthroughtheinternet.com. And it is really very simple, easy, early ways of going through and learning things about, about the browser, HTML, how the internet works. And they're adding on to it as time goes on. Keep learning the specs. This is actually a really good time, I think, to learn web design because we're on the cusp of actually being able to ignore plugins, mostly. What I mean by that is that with the death of Flash and the growth of mobile and these tablet devices, more and more people are moving back to coding stuff in HTML and CSS and JavaScript. It's getting easier and easier to get away with that because you can essentially tell your boss or tell your developer or tell your client, Flash is on its way out. You don't have to learn that extra stuff. You don't have to sit there and write conditional comments for all these different browsers to be able to deal with Flash. You don't have to do a lot of that stuff. Speaking of Flash, it's pretty much officially dead at this point. I mean, Adobe's decided they're going to drop support for mobile devices. It's going to hang on the web for a while longer because it's a legacy medium. People can do a lot of that stuff. But basically, Adobe's saying we're not going to support it, and especially, I think, RIM saying that they're going to write their own version of it. Anything that RIM touches at this point, pretty much, they had a really good product for a long time. And also, with more and more selectors being built into CSS3, what that means is that a lot of stuff that we used to have to use JavaScript for that had to be handled in a DOM language, you can deal with in CSS, in native CSS. So that's kind of useful, and that's kind of cool. If you already know the CSS syntax, you don't have to sit there and switch your brain back and forth between CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. You just have to switch back and forth between CSS and HTML. So that's super useful. If you know a little bit of code already, these are brief books from the people who run a list apart. They've started a regular publishing company called A Book Apart. I read HTML5 for web designers in about 45 minutes, and it let me go out and start applying HTML styles to pages that I'm building. It's super useful. The same with CSS3, all of these other things, responsive web design, they are really fantastic. And then the next to last thing to do, I guess, is to be inspired, follow creative people, and just take a look at some of these lovely online resources that we have for these different things. So A List Apart, obviously, the people who run A Book Apart are super useful. Their articles cover just about anything you want to deal with in terms of what's going on the web currently. Put them in your RSS feed or put them in your RSS reader and go through, and they have this stuff nicely selected in here, and they stay abreast of what's going on the web. So you can, you'll realize what's going on. What's going on, what they're writing about is extremely current. Jessica Hish is a designer and also behind the Built for the Internet project. She and her boyfriend this is just a really awesome site to look for inspiration for illustrative work that she's done. She also knows some code that's sort of fun to do. If you click on Team Girl Mode, her website will transform into something that you would see in GeoCities or something like that. Jason Santa Maria, really fantastic source for inspiration for design and things like that. He's the founder at, it's either the Mighty or just Mighty, it's one of those hipster kind of names, but a design studio in New York that's pretty fantastic. And is involved with TypeKit, which is involved in getting better type onto the web, better typography onto the web. Subtraction.com, if you haven't seen it, is both beautifully designed. It's actually designed on a grid, which more websites need to be designed on. But it's the blog of Koi Ben, who was for about 5 years the design director of the New York Times, the digital design director. Now actually just came out with a social mixing iPad app thing that I've been meaning to look at and I haven't gotten a chance to. And then Strange Native is the site of Russ Mashmeyer, who's apparently now engaged to Jessica Hish, and the two of them together do really cool web projects and interesting stuff together. Speaking of a book apart, this is a sample site that comes with a book apart. We use it in class, and it will tell you how to do a lot of these transforms and a lot of these cool things in CSS. From examples that are in the book, you can actually download this code and play around with it and compare it to the CSS book, and figure out how to do just fun little presentational things like this that you can natively code in CSS and learn pretty quickly. So be inspired, and then go out and bask in your newfound knowledge and make cool stuff. I mean, none of this is difficult to learn. It's something that you can really easily ease yourself into, and if it's not perfect the first time, it wasn't perfect for anybody the first time through when they did anything. If you go back to the Jason Santa Maria site, he has, for example, and I think this is on his About page, previous embarrassing editions of his website. Okay, get the Flash plugin to the Flash site that was his website back in 2001. So you can tell that this is obviously an iterative process, and some of this is the web has gotten better, and some of this is this guy has 10 years of design experience. But these things change over time; they get better over time. And so that's basically my plea to you to put your river, start learning code yourself, and really go out and enjoy it and have fun with it. It's not terrible, is it?
No.
Okay, not terrible. Not terrible.
Ashley and I are both taking Rob's 4502 class, and so it's pretty good.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. Andrew's going to take it, I think, next semester, right?
I am.
That was our shameless plug for your class, I guess. There you go.
Or maybe not next semester, but in the very near future.
Yes. Sometime soon. Great.
Oh, looks totally different.
No, man. You want to hear our person on that?
It's like I am.
You're literally doing it.
Caught on fire or anything.
I have been invited because I don't have a Mac and we need to have it.
David's the only person on our faculty that I support at least who has a PC. So.
So what I'm going to talk to you guys about tonight is this data journalism thing. How many of you have heard the term data journalism thrown around, or computer assisted reporting? Data journalism is kind of the name, the flashy new name that this is going by. I'll give you a little history a little bit, so and we can talk about where all this came from. But doing some of the benefits of doing data journalism, the biggest one is that you will get better stories than your competitors. That's like a guarantee. So if you were having computer system reporting, you can look into digital information that's kept by government agencies, and you can find stories that other people don't have. And that's one of the best feelings in the world. Like nobody can do this story but me. And stories that you just wouldn't be able to do at all if you didn't have data. So I'm going to show a couple of examples from print. That I thought were really interesting. One example, and this comes from the Missourian. This story was done by Joe Girardi, who's a master's student here. He's in his third semester, and he works in the NICAR database library, which is an operation of investigative reporters and editors. And what Joe did is, does everybody remember the Columbia ward map controversy that was going on? This was dragging over several weeks. There were a whole bunch of different options for ward maps that were being floated. And it was very highly charged because one of the options that was being promoted by a city councilman and basically nobody else would have benefited him. That's what people were saying. So the anecdotal story that was out there was that this guy was trying to promote this option because it benefited him. It was kind of an income protection plan. And so what Joe did was, when he decided he wanted to look deeper into the story, so he got a hold of mapping files that showed the locations of all of the wards, and then also how the different precincts within those wards voted over time. And he found out that by looking at that data, that it would most likely increase the re-election chances of two particular city council members who otherwise might face a tougher re-election if under other options. So that was a story that nobody else had. And Joe was able to nail it down because he got the elections data, and then also the shape files for the maps, and overlay that and show where the votes were coming from. So this was certainly not a story that anybody else had, which I was really impressed by that he just went out, got that, and did that story, and didn't take him too long to do it either. Another benefit of computer-assisted reporting is that web apps love data. So, when I'm talking about web apps, these things that you see on news sites that are constantly fed with information. So, the New York Times has been doing this for a few years now. I think they did it with the 2008 election. And what they did is they set up programming scripts that went into the Federal Election Commission database, harvested that data on an ongoing basis, and fed it into their web applications. So you can see over time where Barack Obama's support is coming from and where Romney's support. So this is there are no people who are constantly feeding this data manually into this application. It's constantly going out and getting the data. So, if you can work with data, this is the kind of thing that you do if you have the programming skills and also the data skills. I'm just going to point out that one of the guys one of the people who was on the apprentice here is Kevin Quealy, who got his master's degree here about 5 years ago. And he came in here knowing data pretty well, taught himself programming, and got an internship at the New York Times, and then got a full-time job at the New York Times. So he really was able to put all those things together and turn that into a pretty nice first job. And so with these web applications, this is not static information. This is information that's changing over time. It's also information that you can drill down into depending on what you click on. So if you want to see what Michelle Bachmann is getting, you can click on that, and then it says, okay, I'm just going to show you the data for Michelle Bachmann and where she's getting her money from. So I know her dots are really tiny, except up here in Minnesota where she's getting more money. They also have comparative data from that Obama was getting in 2007. So you can see, okay, Obama now on the left, and then Obama in 2007 on the right. And so, all of these things, when you click on them, it issues instructions and says, okay, go into the database and pull out this information and redraw the map or redraw the graphic of it. So, all this is, when I'm talking about data, I'm talking about stuff that's stored in columns and rows. So it's not generic information, but stuff that's very highly structured. Another web app that I really liked, let's go back out here, ProPublica, has everybody heard of ProPublica? So if you haven't, it's an investigative newsroom that is very well funded, and it's a national organization. They do these big stories about healthcare, about how doctors all across the United States are taking money from healthcare companies and also from prescription drug companies and things like that. So that information gets disclosed, and so what they did was they did a big national story, but they also wanted to make it relevant to people all across the United States. So they allowed you to go and drill down by your state. Say, okay, in the money that was disclosed here in Missouri, here are the payments. There's one research payment of $60,000 made to the university, one by Pfizer of $11,000 to St. Louis University. And then you can also click on that, and then you get more detailed information about that particular payment from Pfizer to the University of Missouri. So, all this is stuff that's being pulled out of a database. It exists on the data side that when you click on this, it issues instructions to pull that out. So web apps load data. Also, a benefit of this is you can enhance your resume. So computer assisted reporting is one of those things that remains wildly in demand. And for all 10 years that I've been here, it's the same. Data skills are very much valued. And if you need some proof, you can go to the newsnerdjobs.com site that recently launched, like within the past couple of weeks. And these are all the unfilled positions for people who know how to use data and also know some programming and web development. This is a really long list. These are positions that are open right now at WNYC. The Guardian has 2 positions open. Washington Post has a bunch. New York Times has some. The AP. WBEZ in Chicago. Boston Globe has a bunch. So these are all jobs that are at great news organizations and also pay very well. They will pay you more than the average regular old reporting job. And also in this section, there's an internship section. So you can see what kind of internships are available here. Let's try. So these are web and data skill internships. Pretty much all big news organizations. And this is growing as folks across the country are filling these out. So, this is a, if you're at all interested in interactivity, check these sites out. Look at the skills that are needed and then learn those skills while you're here. So talking about data journalism, I want to let you on a little secret here. One thing, it's not new. Even though there's kind of this meme going around that, this data journalism is brand new and this stuff is just being invented right now. So this goes back to the 1970s, before all of you were born. There was this guy, or most of you were born, and there was this guy named Phil Meyer, who was an investigative reporter for night newspapers, and he was using social science methods to report on things like the race riots in Detroit, and also IRS enforcements. And so what he would do is, this was back in the days of punch cards, which computers ran on these punch cards, and he would go on a government mainframe, rent time at night, because at that time, government computers leased their nighttime hours out to private individuals, because they were idle. And then he would do his data runs, and then crank out really good stories about different social trends. And then in the late 1980s, the J School set up MyCar, which was the Missouri Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting. and hired a guy named Elliot Jaspin from Providence Journal to teach the class here. And then in the early 1990s, my card got taken over by IRE, so it was nationalized, and then there was more widespread adoption of the card back in the early 90s. And now in this part of the century, we're seeing more things like open source development in newsrooms. In places like the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune are using open source tools to create pretty cool web apps. And also where data journalism is coming up to describe this bigger world of presenting data on the web. But if you want to work with data, there are some basic things that you will need to know. One is you will need to know how to find that data. Then you will need to, after you've found it, you will need to know how to get it. Do you download it from a website? Do you file a Freedom of Information Act request to get it from the federal government? Or do you file a sunshine request with the state? And then after you get the data, what you need to do is you need to really take a good, close look at it to make sure that to make sure that your data isn't bad, because all data is dirty. Anybody who's taking the card class, can tell you that data is pretty ugly stuff most of the time, and that there are holes in it. And you need to know what those holes are before you start working with it. And then after you understand those holes, you can analyze it, and then you can do things like visualize it. And in terms of the basic card tools, the web browser, is a no-brainer because you need to know how to point your web browser to sites that actually have data. And then we use spreadsheets. How many of you have used a spreadsheet for a story? Okay, one hand. So not that many. How many of you have used a spreadsheet to do something? Okay, mostly everybody's touched a spreadsheet to do something. So we can see. Some data here that one of my students got a data file of nuisance parties. So you guys all know what nuisance parties are, right? So these are nuisance parties, the addresses, and the dates and the year.
So we can search for Mike McKean's house and see.
How many? And so you can do things like you can say, okay, I wonder if any particular addresses had more than one nuisance party, because that's like a double nuisance, right? Or a double badge of honor, depending on how you're looking at it. So if you know how to create what's called a pivot table in Excel, this is something that we learned how to do in computer system reporting. You can pretty quickly figure out, here we have 3 addresses. 1918 Myrtle Grove, 2305 Solano Court, and 2413 Pimlico that have more than one nuisance party.
I saw mine on there for a minute.
And then the next tool that you learn how to use is what's called a database manager. And database managers allow you to work with bigger data sets. They allow you to really do some interesting number crunching. They also allow you to match 2 tables that were never meant to be matched. So here with this one, we just got to doing this in the car class. This was matching a list of people who had child support orders and people who were state employees. And then we ran the SQL, which is structured query language code. And that told us, okay, we have 269 people who we matched on their name and their zip code and could possibly be people in the state payroll who have child support orders and who aren't paying. And so there are a bunch of other tools that you could use. You could use text editors, or Andy Robb mentioned text editors. So we use text editors to look at our data, and also GIS mapping tools. So in terms of what you can do to learn computer system reporting, you can join Hackers IRE, which I guess you really can't join it because it's a meetup Ted is one of the co-founders of it.
Okay.
And we meet every second Wednesday of.
Yeah, second Wednesday of every month. The next one, David's actually going to be talking at. So we'll be talking about Open Missouri and the interesting things that we're hoping to do with that. But our goal is to the goal of Hacks Hackers in general is to kind of bridge the gap between journalists and developers. I'm a software developer. I was hired by IRE to work on Document Cloud. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to teach journalists how to program.
So that's one way you can get plugged in. Another way is you can take the car class. It probably doesn't have any spots left for the spring, but for the fall, next fall. Experiment with stuff. I mean, you're not going to break anything. Download spreadsheets from a website, state government website, play around with it. If you mess it up, download the file again and start over. So you cannot hurt anybody by doing this. Hang around smart people who are smarter than you. Find people who are web developers, people who are social scientists, people who look at the world in different ways and figure out how they analyze things. Also, this is very important, is developing what we call the database state of mind. And the database state of mind is going with the approach that I know that I'm working on this story, it's about X. I know that there's got to be a database about that somewhere. Is there really truly a database? Maybe not, but if you go in thinking that way, you will start seeing databases everywhere and be very successful at getting them. And also know your open records laws. Very important because to get data that you need for your web applications or your stories, you'll often need to request it from government agencies. And so I'm running out of time. I'm just going to show you some Web 2.0 tools. I also have Web 2.0 tools up on SlideShare, so if you just Google Web 2.0 tools for data journalism, you should be able to find it. So we're running out of time, and I'll stop here.
All right. We can take questions for just a few minutes if anybody has anything. Anything at all?
Yeah, I do. Rob, when you said Flash is dead, like, how is that going to appear? Like, how are we going to see that? Like,
well, what I mean by that is that by sort of staking a claim against Flash on its tablet device, which is by far the most popular one in the US, by Apple saying we're not going to run this on our mobile phones or on our tablet devices, there really aren't even mobile phones that run. I mean, Adobe's basically dropped support for Flash entirely on mobile. It was attempting to still run Flash on mobile. So what we're going to see is instead of using Flash as a technology to animate things and make them slide around and stuff like that, what we'll see instead is doing those with tools like some of the new CSS3 selectors, or we'll see that done in the new native HTML5, like the video tag, the audio tag, stuff like that. And what we're seeing in general is a move away from plugins and an attempt to present that in the actual HTML stack. It's a big part of what HTML5 is about. And because it's not a plugin, because it's an actual tag, you can apply styling to it through CSS, and you can apply, you can make things fire when you load a page or when you mouse over it or whatever else using JavaScript or jQuery, whatever you want to do. So that's going to essentially replace Flash. So instead of having the Flash player in the browser and stuff like that, what you're going to see is it's going to be increasingly less prevalent. And the point of Apple and the point of why mobile Flash dying is important is, and you guys probably all heard this being good ONA members, by next year, if not, if the original prediction was 2013, by probably summer to fall of next year, there are going to be far more devices like this connected to the internet in the US than there will be devices like this. The handset is going to overtake computers, handsets, and tablets. So if there's no mobile Flash, and that's the way most people are getting on the internet, then we're not going to see that. We're going to have to replace it with other tools and use other technology to be able to deal with it. Does that answer your question?
yeah.
Well, Flash is also a profoundly pointer-based technology, so it just does not work well with touch devices where you can have multiple points of contact.
In other words, a lot of the things that Flash did were you take your cursor and you hover over something, that there isn't a hover on this device. Like either it's a 1 or a 0, I'm touching it or I'm not.
So don't start the Flash project.
There's one question I had, and this goes, Mike, back to your presentation, showing a lot of the two students who had used, their iPhones for going out reporting. It's seeming like it's becoming more common and more, I guess more easy isn't grammatically correct, easier to, you know, be using your iPhone. But at what point do we say, hey, we should still be using a Marantz or taking out a DSLR versus using an iPhone to be doing those things?
I mean, a lot of it depends on the type of story you're covering, the environment you're in, the kind of news organization you're working for, whether you're encouraging, you know, breaking news coverage versus something you're trying to package. But, I mean, truthfully, the quality of the still photographs you can take now with the newest iPhone are great. I mean, you don't have all the different lenses and other things so far, but they're pretty good. The audio quality that you can record if you are in an environment that's not really noisy or whatever is exceptionally good, right? So there may be times when you are trying to create a pristine, you know, package and you might want the better equipment, but I mean, it seems to me like they're beginning to merge.
Yeah, I think the Olympics thing was probably, to an extent, a proof of concept, you know, the idea
Right.
that you could use this mobile tool. But I think I work with the magazine a lot in the summers, and if we're going to do a photo shoot for Vox, where we're going to do something we want to do out in our product shots, of course I'm going to bring them into the studio, and I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have that space and the lighting and stuff. But a lot of that gets back to, you know, the best phone, or the best camera that you have is the one that you have, right? It's the one that you have on you. If you're out and you see something happening, the idea that you can cover breaking news and shoot video that would be TV, would be broadcast quality off of this device is pretty cool, you know.
And the fact that you can integrate it more and more with your CMS, I mean, there's ways to either wirelessly or through the 3G networks to get that content back. That advantage may sometimes outweighs the quality of the image that, for example, you're trying to capture.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any more questions?
All right, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So,